So we're going to cover where were we with textiles in the past, where are we now, and where are we heading next. Next slide. And in the beginning, we had no textiles. We had nudity, right? If you look at every classical definition and origin story in religion, there are no clothes. Next. And what we see is that clothes come. And in 40,000 BCE, you start to see the use of needle and thread to create fashion, to create apparel. Next slide. And somewhere around 30,000 BC, we actually see the advent of textiles used in production methods. And by the time we get to 3300 BCE, where we have the famous Ötzi the Iceman found in the Alps in Italy, we see that he's wearing the equivalent of Gore-Tex for his day. He's got layering, he's got multiple different weaves, he has fasteners on his apparel, and the guy even has pockets. I mean, this is pretty advanced stuff. As we start to look at other areas of textiles, let's look at the application of those materials. And we see in 3200 BC, we start to see sails emerge in the hieroglyphics of Egypt. And they're using a lateen rig, a very simple rig. Around 2000, we see weaving starts to spread, and the loom starts to appear in all of the archaeology, both in images and also the evidence of it in the materials that are being produced. Between 1300 BCE and 1300 AD, you see things like Nefertiti. Again, the feedback loop between where she was and what she's wearing. She's got on a linen. You see King Edward in his gaudy, ostentatious material displaying his wealth. And then on the far left, you've got China, and they've domesticated an insect, the silkworm, to make a new material. To harvest that silk, they created a new weave, and then they put that into new and novel applications where that stronger thread made for stronger material. Let's go back to transportation. If we look at that lateen rig, we put on a second sail, we put 30 to 40 people on it, and now we have a caravel. Well, why would we care about a caravel? Well, it's because that is what the Portuguese used to begin the age of exploration. These ships were driven around the world by the power of cloth through the sail. That invention and trend continues with the Bermuda rig, which was developed in the Caribbean around 1700. Here we have bigger ships. Again, transporting things around the world, all driven by textiles. In 1784, we see another divergence in how textiles are made with the advent of a method called carding. And this is the first non-woven. Beforehand, every time we made a fiber, we made it into a yarn. And with carding, that stops. So you get different materials that you can work with. You get different applications that can be used in. In 1784, we see Cartwright in England develop the powered loom. Now, what's interesting about this is that this was a commercial failure for 47 years until the Lancaster loom was invented, because for every one powered loom of Cartwright's model, you needed one operator. The powered loom does not take off for 47 years until you can have one operator and more looms, so you get rid of labor. And as we talk and continue, we'll flash back, and that getting rid of labor is a thing that we see persist throughout the history of textiles. Now, every time we read about some country looking to undermine an industrial manufacturing base here in the US by going after an industry, we have one person to blame. Unfortunately, that person is a founding father. Hamilton's report on manufacturers in 1789 laid out the US industrial strategy for the next 2 centuries. He sent industrial spies to England to look at mills, to understand what they were, and to bring that technology back to the US. So here, when you think of the application of textiles, he was applying it to a whole new society, to a whole new way of looking at the world in order to fund this nascent democracy. In 1793, Eli Whitney comes along with a cotton gin. Before this, people worked with cotton, but you couldn't work with that much of it because it was too expensive. It was too labor intense to harvest cotton. So you create a new material out of which to make the textiles, and in so doing, you change the agricultural base, you change the demographics, and you change the agricultural scene of the Southeast United States. In 1804, the jacquard loom comes around. This is the first piece of equipment that uses punch cards. So if anyone's familiar with the computer industry and IBM punch cards and use of Hollerith cards, this all stems from Jacquard's pioneering use of this material to store data, to store a pattern, and to use it as human-machine interface. And just so you understand the lasting impact of that, there's two brands on this page, eBay, again, just less than a decade old, and a 206-year-old Jacquard loom, again, his brand, but a modern creation, that any of us could go buy today. 1814, Francis Cabot Lowell returns at the age of 36. He'd gone to England, again, following Hamilton's vision, and brings back a textbook application of how I'm going to take these textiles and grow a manufacturing base here in the US. In 1881, the third of the three major stitches, the overlock stitch, again building on the lock stitch and the chain stitch, is pioneered by a company by the name of the Merrow Manufacturing Company in Connecticut, which still operates to this day. This is the stitch you see at the edge. So for every 1 inch of edge, you could have as many as 22 inches of yarn to seal it and give it the properties that you want to have. Now what's interesting is Merrow continues to be the leader in this technology until the 1960s, when a Japanese company by the name of Juki comes along and starts to pioneer an improvement on this, on the overlock stitch. One of their first international offices is 15 miles from here in the Research Triangle Park. Nylon is one of the biggest inventions when it comes to textiles, and probably one of the most important inventions if you look at the history of innovation. And what's fascinating about this is it's our first opportunity to create a synthetic material, and what we did with it was make a fiber. We could have done anything with it. You could make a toothbrush, and people made toothbrush bristles. Think of all the different things we have today that we make out of a plastic. The first thing that we did was make a fiber. The Gerber Automatic Cutting Company, and this is my last slide on our whirlwind tour, in 1969 pioneered a method for automatic cutting. This is decades before robots would be used to help build a car. So before robots made cars, they happened to make textiles. And they even made, for one reason or another, this was mostly used in undergarments. So the robots were making sexy textiles. So where are we now? And to understand where we are now in the textile industry starts with an understanding of public policy. And tariffs and trade agreements around textiles go back far beyond what we have on this list here. But they all guide us towards the 1994 Agreement on Textiles and Clothing, and then getting us to the 2004 when the quotas are abolished. And we all know what happens to us here in North Carolina. And that's the two graphs on the top, the red and the blue, are textile and apparel related jobs, and you see how they immediately fall off once the tariffs are lifted. Across the bottom, we see the impact as jobs are lost across the state of North Carolina. And while we see that it's disappointing that we lose the fashion and the apparel, there's another line here that never goes down. It stays level, and that is the use of technical textiles. We lost the fashion jobs, we lost the mills that sold into fashion, but we kept the materials that are sold into items like battery separators, like high-end filtration for pharmaceuticals processing. Those did not leave, and we as a state remain a leader in that industry. So following up on the broader national trend, you see the green of manufacturing jobs tail off, and it decreases more and more in every depression, in every recession. But the red and the blue of manufacturing output continues to rise. So as we understand why is that, again, productivity continues to rise. Well, let's just look at this shirt that I've gone on. And in 1975, it would have taken 13 minutes of time on a loom in order to make the shirt. Today it takes 3. And as you look at what that impact means, and again, a great quote from a fantastic book if you want to learn more on this industry, is that while textile production has increased almost 3-fold, the number of workers has been reduced by more than half. And we spend too much time as North Carolinians focused on the second half of this phrase. We spend too much time thinking about all the things that we've lost and not looking at that 3x improvement in productivity that we've gained. Think about what that would mean in so many of the industries that we work with. And where does that productivity gain come from? It comes from research done here in our own state. The College of Textiles at NC State University is a one-of-a-kind global institution. Every year you've got 200 people, about 150 undergrads, 50 grad students from all over the world matriculating through that program. This is a one-of-a-kind institution. If you are a small cut-and-sew operation in rural Southeast Asia and you're going to make one international trip in 2011, you're going to come to an event at the NC State College of Textiles. If you're a small business in Central Europe and you want to figure out where your second office should be, you're going to hire a rep or come to Raleigh or Charlotte to open that next business, especially if you're selling into an industrial or technical textile supply chain. So we've talked a little about where we were, where we began, and let's take a little bit of a peek into the future and see where we're going with textiles and why this is an industry that we should not only be proud about, but we should be looking to accelerate our investment into over the coming decades. So let's look at the year 2030, right? We're in transportation. Are we driving an electric-powered vehicle? How many here, show of hands, who would buy an electric battery-powered car? All right, well, odds are that that vehicle, the separator from it, is going to be a technical textile that was either developed or manufactured here in our state. And this year, big announcement from DuPont in Richmond. They're putting a $20 million nanofiber production facility for advanced lithium-ion battery membranes in Richmond. Let's think about, well, maybe we don't ever get to high-power batteries. Maybe it's not lithium-ion. Maybe we're going to work with biofuels. Biofuels are very nasty. They're very inconsistent, and they do a lot of bad things to an engine. So if you want to think about how do I protect that engine, you're going to have to do it with advanced filtration. And even if you look at how biomaterials are processed in order to make a fuel, there are anywhere between 5 and 30 processing steps which involve the use of a technical textile. Again, those are materials all being developed and pioneered within an hour's drive of where we're all sitting. Let's look out even further, 2040, to health. Everyone here familiar with stem cells? Show of hands. So the question is what do I grow those stem cells on? Right? We don't just release a stem cell and it magically knows where to go. If you want to regrow an organ, or if you want to grow a rotator cuff that's been torn, what you're going to have to do is grow that material on something. What will be that substrate? What will be that tissue scaffold? And at the nano scale, in a life science setting, a textile is currently your leading contender. Let's look at something else. How do high-end pharmaceuticals get made? When someone's making Tylenol, how do they make sure that there are no impurities introduced during the manufacturing process? How do we make sure that the water is pure? How do we make sure that we can make enough of it? Well, again, we do that with industrial level processing, which is enabled through industrial textiles. So any vision you have of the future where there are more personalized and tailored medicines, where there are new drugs and therapies that will extend the human life, textiles enable that vision. So finally, let's look out. I know we had earlier today someone speak about aerospace, but let's look at the frontier. Can man live beyond Earth? Can you get single stage to orbit? The reason that people work with fiberglass, again, it's fiberglass, is because of the structural strengthening of the materials. A number of the machine companies that move here to North Carolina, and a surprisingly a high number of companies that come here to make use of our history in NASCAR and development of custom performance products, do so because of the high strength and high degree of reliability that those parts introduce. So if you want to make an advanced aerodynamic vehicle, if you want to make a carbon fiber jet, you're more than likely going to be working with advanced textile production processes. So when you think about what are things that we can do to think real big, to move beyond Earth, again, those capabilities will be made possible by an increased use of technical textiles. So to conclude, I think for a lot of years, many of us have been apologists about our loss of jobs and what could be considered fashion. We've lost many jobs that would be considered cut and sew or very basic industries. But what we've kept is a very important industry in technical textiles that should be at the forefront of how we look at growing our state. It should be at the forefront about how we look at growing entrepreneurship. And it should be something that we can sit back and take pride in as a state and an organization. Thank you.